Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about the Treaties of Velasco, but it might take us a little bit to get there. So stick with me. I'm your host, as always, and your professor, Dr. Summer Cherland. So before we begin, let's start with a 1-minute right. Your text explains, on May 14th, Santa Anna signed 2 peace treaties with interim Texas President David G. Burnett. The public treaty consisted of 10 articles. A second secret treaty consisted of 6 additional articles. The secret agreement was to be carried out when the public treaty had been fulfilled. And that quotes from our website with the Texas State Library and Archives. So here's what I want you to do. Take a moment, time yourself, give yourself 1 minute. Read this quote and on your own, react. Why do you think there were 2 treaties? What do you think the purpose was for keeping one private? You don't have to know the answer, just write your immediate response. Give yourself 1 minute to write. If you need a little longer, give yourself 2, but don't give yourself too long. Just answer immediately, as quickly as you can, what you think the answer is. Pause the recording and come back when you're ready. Okay, welcome back. You may get some answers to your 1 minute right. You may get some more information that helps you fill out your prediction and your thoughts, or you may not. Let's see. So let's begin with where Mexico's at this time. It's the early 19th century, 1800s, and Mexico has some serious tensions that are resulting from Spanish misrule and colonial oversight. Mexican independence, which we'll talk about today, was an 11-year struggle by Mexicans to earn political independence after 3 centuries of Spanish rule. Spain owned or claimed Mexico for a significantly longer period than Britain did for the Americas, or than French did for parts of the Americas, or the Dutch did for parts of the Americas. So it's really important for you to recognize that Mexico was under Spain's thumb for a significantly long period of time. And when they began to jockey for independence and individuality from Spain, it took over 10 years, took 11 years. It lasted from 1810 to 1821. There were a lot of problems with Mexico and Spain, and here were some of the highlights. The first is, you might remember, La Casta. So on the right, you'll see a picture of the colonial class structures, and this is done by Indigenous America. At the very top of the pyramid in terms of social and economic power were the peninsulares. These were Spanish people born in Spain. And right below them were the criollos, right? That's the word used in Mexico. It's been sort of translated in English to be Creole. It means born in New Spain, Mexico, to Spanish parents. And then everybody else below them kind of fell in order that way. So there was a lot of conflict among people in terms of the ranking of the races and ethnicities. Another problem that Spain had with their oversight of Mexico is how humongous their land holdings were. Think back to those maps we've discovered recently about Spanish colonial control. I mean, we went all the way into Central America, right? And then all the way up into places like Northern California and today's Colorado and Arizona and New Mexico. Territory that as wide as you could imagine and as far as you could reach, right? So Spain had just massive land holdings that they really didn't have a lot of control over. Spain also had an ongoing extractive relationship with Mexico that originated with Cortez and the Aztecs. Basically, they saw Mexico as a way to make them money, right? They didn't see Mexico as an equal partner in their empire. Mexico was a colony. Its goal or its purpose was to generate revenue for the crown. So there's a couple things I've listed here in the PowerPoint for you to consider. In 1804, the law of consolidation pretty much required that Mexican churches were ordered to sell their real estate, their land holdings, and then all of their loan proceedings or proceeds would go back to Spain. There was also an ongoing conflict with Napoleon in France, right, and in Spain. So there's like ongoing conflict with Napoleon, and these wars are expensive. And so Spain's looking to Mexico to help them finance these wars. Basically, Spain was bankrupting Mexico. And then you have an additional economic and geological factor, environmental factor rather, poor harvests and serious famine, specifically in central Mexico. Oops. So then, and I mentioned Napoleon. So in 1808, the French Emperor Napoleon I invaded Spain. And what happened was he's a French guy. He invades Spain and he forces the King Ferdinand the 12th, to abdicate. That's not 12. King Ferdinand the 7th, my bad, to abdicate. And then he places Joseph. Napoleon places his brother Joseph on the throne. So essentially, all residents of Spain's empire, including Mexico, are then required to sort of see Joseph as their new king when they've been used to Ferdinand, right? So they did not agree. They definitely rejected Joseph, but the Peninsulares and the Criollos had a different approach to how they were going to reject this rule. So let's talk about these tensions. Remember, Peninsulares are at the very top of the social pyramid, and Criollos are like the next level down. Criollos are people of full Spanish descent. So they are born to two Spanish parents, but they're born in the Americas. They wanted to create a provisional government that acted in the name of Ferdinand. Peninsulares, who are Spanish-born people from Spain, but resided in Mexico. So they were born in Spain and later moved to Mexico. They just sort of wanted to maintain the status quo. What happens is by late September 1808, the Peninsulares have managed to prevail. And so they sort of got the impression that they were in control, essentially, right? And there becomes a conflict within the Mexican people themselves. So here we have the rumblings of the Mexican independence movement, and it comes in three phases. I'm going to cover those three phases in just a moment, but there are some things that you'll probably recognize. Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla was a Catholic priest in the central Mexican village of Dolores, and he was the leader of the Criollos. So he was Spanish. He was born in Mexico, but to Spanish parents, right? Is that right? Let's triple check. Yes, very good. Then in the summer of 1810, he led a group of plotters that pretty much agreed to a rebellion. They decided they were going to rebel against the Spanish throne. And that included, they recruited people from all levels of La Casta. So that included mestizos, which are people who are of white and indigenous blood, as well as your text said the word Indian. You can also say native people. Essentially, the colonial authorities, many of whom were Peninsulares, learned of the rebels' plans, but there was this wife who found out about it. And so she alerted Hidalgo and the rebels to any sort of impending danger. That's kind of what happened that turned the tides. Now, you might recognize this if you celebrate Mexican Independence Day. On September 16th, 1810, a date that Mexicans still celebrate as their country's Independence Day, Hidalgo struck. At the sound of the church bells, people gathered in the Dolores town square, where Hidalgo asked them to join him in the fight to free Mexico from Spanish colonial rules. This plea became known across the country as Grito de Dolores, or Cry of Dolores. So, like I said, there are three phases, and the phases are identified or defined by the leader. So phase one with Hidalgo, okay? Hidalgo recruited 80,000 troops with his Cry of Dolores. These troops massacred most of those who sought refuge, and they essentially caused sort of like a conflict among both Criollos and Peninsulares. But royalists forced and squashed the rebellion in 1811. So even though they were really successful in 1810, by 1811, Hidalgo was captured. He was tried and found guilty for treason, and he was sentenced to death. In 1811, he was executed by firing squad. But that doesn't end the insurrection. The second phase of independence begins. Led by another insurgent parish priest, Jose Moria Morelos, had better military abilities than Hidalgo. He had a little bit more military background. He also kind of had like a prominence about him in that he rejected senseless violence as an instrument of war. He insisted on strict discipline among his troops, and he surrounded himself with very capable people. Morelos also had some ideas in mind inspired by the American independence movement. He had a concrete set of goals, right? And he also helped to draft and distribute a Declaration of Independence as well as a Constitution. Just like Hidalgo, royalist troops captured him. They tried him. He was found guilty of treason and heresy, and he was sentenced to death. Just like Hidalgo, he was executed by firing squad. Phase 3 of the Mexican independence movement. At this point, Spain believes that Mexico is under control. They've killed 2 of the major leaders. They've squashed 2 phases of this independence movement. They think they're done. But the insurgency remains because of guerrilla tactics, meaning kind of hidden, covert military operations. And these are infrequent. They're not like a marching towards each other kind of war. It's sort of an infrequent surprise attacks. These were led by Manuel Felix Fernandez. You may know him as Guadalupe Victoria and Vincent Guerrero. What happens is they over time are able to deteriorate the royalists' kind of efforts and their momentum. So officers in Mexico realize that they're fighting a war that will probably never end. If they execute Fernandez for treason, then Guerrero will just rise to power, right? They've now seen 2 executions that just result in another leader taking its place. So they decided that what they should do instead is negotiate for peace. Well, what's happening in Spain, right? So we always look at like Mexico is so influenced by Spain up until Mexican independence. So meanwhile in Spain, Ferdinand VII, which had, remember, been booted out by Napoleon, is restored to the throne 6 years later when Spain overthrew the French administration. He is forced to restore the Constitution of 1812. That was the constitution that was done under Morelos. This further aggravates the colonial army's conditions, and it allows for local authorities in Mexico to abolish all sorts of things like taxes and essentially deprive the Spanish army of any source of funding. Well, then we have peace and independence. And I don't know if your screen's a little funny, but mine is. So let's take a moment. That's better. So essentially what happens is criollos and peninsulares come together in Mexico and they decide to establish a peaceful achievement of independence. So they're no longer going to fight with each other. Royalists are kind of giving up at this point. Royalists are those who are loyal to the crown in Spain. And so essentially they realize they have to kind of negotiate a peace pattern that everyone can agree to. So that's led by Agustín de Iturbide, and he understands the situation. He realizes that the 1812 Constitution, as written by one of his predecessors, threatened the peninsulares. It sort of debunked their role as the social elite. But he also saw a chance for anybody who was in the criollo class, who particularly had a little extra money or a little extra power. He saw this as a chance for them to gain political control in Mexico. So, along with several colleagues in 1821, he authored the Plan of Iguala. And essentially, this is what it agrees to. It declares Mexico's independence. It establishes a constitutional monarchy. It offered the crown to Ferdinand VII. It stated that criollos and peninsulares would have equal rights under the Catholic Church and retain equal rights and privileges. But the plan was so broad that it appealed to both criollos and peninsulares, which is unexpected, right? They didn't think that this conflict would resolve. So essentially, the Spanish royals bowed to this because they saw it as inevitable, and they consummated the process of Mexican independence in 1821. So what does that have to do with the Treaties of Velasco? Well, it kind of sets the stage for what happens next. When Mexico gains independence in 1821, they also gain all of Spain's American territories. So that means Mexico goes from being the country you know of it as it is now, to including all parts reaching into the American Southwest. So all the way up into Northern California, all of Arizona, parts of Colorado, parts of Utah, New Mexico, Texas, all that territory is now owned by Mexico. That was initially Spanish territory, and now it's Mexican. So Mexico becomes increasingly and immediately concerned with the situation in Texas. Okay, it's the 1820s. If you know anything about American history, you know that this is the moment of what's called King Cotton. This is the empire of the cotton plantation industry in America. This is when America becomes the wealthiest country on earth because of the production of cotton. Cotton relies on two things: excellent land for agriculture and human labor in the form of slaves, right? Well, think of where Texas is on the map. It's in the southern part of the United States, but it's to the west of, the traditional South. And this is the 1820s, when Americans are beginning to see things like Manifest Destiny drawing them towards the west coast of the United States. You have a lot of conflict in America and people wanting to kind of stretch their legs, move into new territories. And Texas is right there, right? So to Americans, Texas is southwest. To Mexicans, Texas is northeast, right? So it's right there in the middle of kind of a crossfire. A significant number of American settlers begin arriving in Texas in the 1820s. They're kind of squatting, right? They're living there without being allowed. They're not buying property. They're just kind of claiming territory. So what Mexico decides to do initially is recruit more Mexican families. So we're going to send more Mexican people into Texas, in our new territory of Texas. They called it Tejas, right? And we're going to sort of establish dominance in Texas to keep American settlers out. Meanwhile, President Andrew Jackson attempts to buy Texas from Mexico in 1829 for $5 million. The Mexican government just flatly refuses. Who knows if this was a good choice? I will tell you that the Mexican government, as soon as they earned independence from Spain, did not have a lot of money, right? They were not incredibly wealthy, and they had a lot of mismanagement of their territories. So who knows if $5 million would have saved them a lot of trouble in the end? We'll see. But Americans living in Texas, on the other hand, they decided in this moment that it didn't matter if America wanted to buy Texas. It didn't matter if Mexico was sending citizens into Texas. They wanted to be their own country. And this is late 1820s, early 1830s, and let's see what happens. Mexico sees Texas as their land. The United States sees Texas as an attractive territory for Western settlement. People living in Texas, some of them Tejanos who have lived there their whole lives for generations, see it as Tejas, right? Well, white Americans begin to adopt this concept of Tejas as its own territory, and they declare independence of Texas. They call Texas a republic, and they're going to claim this territory. Well, Mexico sees this as a revolt of their own citizens. I think they also see it as an encroachment of white Americans, but they want to claim the territory before there's like what's kind of considered a civil war or a revolution. So they send one of the most famous guys in Mexican history, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, to subdue this revolt. Santa Anna initially wins at the Alamo, but later he is defeated at San Jacinto and he's captured. So what ends the Texas revolt? It really is the capture of Santa Anna and San Jacinto. And here's what happens is Texas declares the following. Because they've captured the general, right? They want to end the fighting between Texas and Mexico, and they want Mexico to officially recognize the republic's independence. Santa Anna is the commanding general of the Mexican army. He's also the president of the Republic of Mexico. He's captured, he's stuck. So to end the Texas revolt, or to settle Texas independence, depending on what side you're looking at it from, Santa Anna signs 2 treaties with Texas representatives. One treaty is a public treaty. Everyone knows about it. The other treaty is a secret treaty. No one knows about it. It's signed on April 21st, 1836, both treaties. The terms of the secret treaty were supposed to become public after the public treaty had been met in full. Whoa, right? Is this surprising to you? The idea that a war could be ended, or a revolution or an independence movement could be ended with secret treaties? Let's find out what's the difference between the two. Okay, the public treaty, Treaty of Velasco, public. The Treaty of Velasco had 10 conditions. Here are most of them. End the fighting immediately, and Mexico promises to never attack Texas again. Withdraw all Mexican troops south of the Rio Grande. If you're in Mexico, you would call it the Rio Bravo del Norte, but in Texas, it's called the Rio Grande. Mexico will not seize any property, and they will return all property. Now, when I'm talking about property, I'm not just saying land, right? Or tools or guns. We're also talking about livestock and Black slaves. So Mexico has to return all property, including human beings, and not seize any more, not kidnap any more people. The two opposing armies will remain 5 leagues, which is about like less than 20 miles apart from each other in order to avoid contact. The commanders of both armies will get daily updates on the ongoings, right, of each other's armies and how the treaty is being met. Mexico must release all of Texas prisoners. This one's interesting. Mexico has to release every Texas prisoner of war, but Texas only has to release the same number of Mexican prisoners. And they only have to release people who have the same rank. They can retain all other Mexican prisoners. That's an interesting provision. I think you should really think about that one. What does it mean? Why is this significant? Why do they have so much, like, why is Texas getting all of this and Mexico's getting none of it? And then finally, Santa Ana would be returned to Veracruz as soon as it was deemed possible. So that's the public treaty. That's what everybody knows about. It's in the papers, things like that. Well, what's going on with the secret treaty? The secret treaty has the exact same conditions. The first 10 are in there, but there's an addition of 3. Santa Ana is to make arrangements with the Mexican government to receive an official Texas delegation to settle any remaining differences and to officially recognize Texan independence. Okay, who would want this provision secret? Would Texas want this secret, or would Santa Ana? That the Mexican government would have a formal reception of Texas and they would formally recognize Texan independence. 2, a treaty would be created and negotiated between the 2 countries for commerce, meaning trade or exchange of goods and money, and friendship. And 3, finally, this is so significant in the coming like 10 years, okay? Finally, the treaty would establish the Rio Grande as an official boundary between the 2 countries. So the Rio Grande is the boundary between Texas and Mexico. That's the secret treaty. Why is this secret? Why are these things like being hidden from everybody else? And who are they hiding these things from? Are they hiding it from the Mexican people, from the Texans, from Americans, from presidents, from soldiers, from citizens? Who are they hiding these terms from and why? Doesn't it make you curious? It makes me curious. So in reflection, I want you to consider all of these questions. You don't have to do any research for a reflection question. A reflection question is just like, what do you think, right? What do you think? You don't have to do any research beyond watching this lecture. If you want to include some of the source material you've already read or watched, that's fine too. But I just want to know what you think. You can choose to answer any one of these questions, or you can choose to answer them all. I, of course, would want to answer them all because I would be thinking about all of these. And I know some of you out there are big history junkies like me. Okay, question 1. What do you think were some of the global effects of Mexico's ongoing conflicts with Spain? So at the very beginning of this lecture, we're talking about Mexico having conflict with Spain, Spain having conflict with France. Like, what are some of the global conflicts? And when I use that term global, I mean, how does this eventually impact other countries, not Spain and not Mexico, but say the United States or France, right? How does this conflict between Mexico and Spain manifest in a global perspective? Question 2, what is the deal with Texas? Why do you think Mexico and the United States were so concerned about Tejanos and Texans trying to claim independence of this territory? What is it about Texas that is bothering Mexico and the United States so much? And what is it about Texas that's making people living there want to be independent? What is it about Texas? It's an interesting question. Question 3, like we just talked about. Why were there 2 treaties? Why is there a secret treaty? I'm fascinated by this. What's the point of having a public treaty or a secret treaty? And who do you think they were keeping these secrets from? As I mentioned before, who are they hiding that secret treaty from and why? And then finally, this might be more of a prediction. You may not know the answer to this even a little. So it might just be more like, what do you think in terms of what will happen next. I just told you about conflict with Spain, Mexican independence, Texas Revolution / independence. But what happens next is now America and Mexico go to war. So your question as a student and a scholar and a thinker is, how do you think these things, these conflicts, contributed to the eventual outbreak of war between the United States and Mexico? Think about those questions. Think about those questions, and I've just updated. I had a little typo on my slide, so I changed it and fixed it for you. Pick one or answer all four and tell us what you think. I'd love to hear what you think about today's lesson. If you need the resources or the slides, they're in the Google Share, and I hope you enjoyed today's topic.